We're still waiting to start the meeting. I just wanted to note to everybody on the line right now that we have started the Facebook Live feed. And in the room here, we have a very limited staff. Tried to limit it as much so that we could be underneath the regional order to be under 10 people, and right now we are fulfilling that order. We are also keeping social distancing and yelling at each other across the room, but the microphone is helping, so I appreciate everybody's patience. Do expect this to be a little bit clunky, but thank you for joining us. I will, when we hit the operative hour, I will ask Myra to announce that, and then of course the meeting will be led by Chair Homan.
Polly, just a note. I just signed on to the Facebook page, and John Nation's picture is still on it.
Thank you, Rose. I have Jerry Valele in here. He's waving at me, and we'll handle that.
Thank you. Good morning. Good morning.
I'm sorry, who just joined our meeting?
Richard Valley.
And is Commissioner Holman on the line?
So is Terry Beach.
Yes. I just talked to Commissioner Homan on my cell. She'll be calling in very shortly. So thank you for your patience.
Hello.
Hello, Commissioner Holman.
Good morning.
Thank you for joining us. I will,
All right.
so Commissioner Holman, it's up to you to call the meeting to order. Thank you.
Sounds good. Myra, can you do a roll call?
Commissioner Holman,
Yes.
Commissioner Gully,
I'm here.
Commissioner Cox, Commissioner Cox, Commissioner Galladay,
Here.
Commissioner Winmiller,
Present. I'm just telling you that there's a rather long delay between the live feed and what we're hearing on the phone. Like about 3 minutes.
Commissioner Zimmerman,
Here, can you hear me?
yes, Commissioner Brown,
Perfect.
Here.
Commissioner Beach,
Here, and I don't see the live feed at all. FYI.
Same. And that's Commissioner Holden.
Commissioner Simmons,
I can see it's on the screen.
That's all I see.
This Commissioner Cox, sorry, wait.
Commissioner Simmons, present by phone.
and Commissioner Costello.
Myra, I'm not sure if you didn't get me. This is Commissioner Cox. I'm here now.
Yes, thank you. All commissioners are present with the exception of Commissioner Costello.
And Myra, did you hear my comment or Chair, that there's a huge delay between what's going on the live feed and what we hear on the phone?
Yes.
I heard it for sure.
Yes,
So it's just going live feed.
Commissioner Winmiller,
It's just distracting, so I just signed off the live feed because it's at least 2 minutes.
Thank you, Commissioner. There will be a delay on the Facebook feed. That is normal. It's more certainly fulfilling the requirement for trying to get the public to see what we're doing. We will experience a delay given the network load right now. I wasn't aware that it would be as long as 2 minutes, but that is typical. So, thank you.
Yeah, sure, I understand about a delay. I'm just saying that I'm not looking at the live feed because it's distracting since what we're talking about doesn't show up until several minutes later.
My live feed is dead to begin with. This is Beach. I'll glance at it from time to time to see if it is live, but right now it's just showing the start page.
I think that's kind of all kind of aligned with what some of my initial prescribed comments were. And I'm supposed to say that with the change in format of today's meeting, I would like to ask that everyone please have patience with the board and staff. We are using some new technology today, and we could encounter some glitches. In addition, I mean, yeah, I think if I may just take a quick aside, I feel like there's a quote out there about may live in interesting times, and I truly believe that we are in interesting times, and we want to contribute as individuals and board members and citizens as much as we can, and I think that our team is doing a fantastic job of listening to our concerns, and I think they're just going to continue doing that in our meeting today. Is that fair to say, Colby?
Thank you, Commissioner. Yes, we're doing our best. It is a very dynamic environment.
Sure. And then apparently, in addition, we're also operating with a limited staff and attendance today. And so I think as participants, we need to keep in mind that if we have specific questions for staff who are not in attendance, there might be a little bit of a delay while people are going and trying to get those answers. So I just want to complete that. I'm ad-libbing a little bit from my script, but I just want to say that we appreciate everyone's efforts to make today's meeting possible virtually and dealing with whatever curveballs may be associated with that. So I'm also supposed to say that with regards to the commissioners who are participating via phone, including myself, please make sure that as much as we can, only one person is speaking at a time, and announce your name at each time prior to speaking so that everyone is clear on who's commenting or posing questions. In addition, in an effort for brevity today, President and CEO Talby Roach has recommended that we remove several items from today's agenda. That is assuming that the board approves. Those items include item 15, 17, 19, 20, and 23. So I tell the board members, feel free to consult your agendas in your packet for today for those items. It's basically all of the, most of the odd numbered items from 15, 17, 19, and 20 and 23. So if we want to remove those items from the agenda today, we can probably have a slightly truncated meeting. Does anyone
Commissioner,
Go ahead.
This is Commissioner Windmiller. Do we need a motion?
Yes.
So moved.
Second.
Okay,
I
Myra,
have a question.
go ahead.
Items 15 and 17 look like they're for approval. The other items look like information only.
Yes.
Are there any timing constraints to the approval
Yeah.
or compliance?
Yes, Commissioner, this is Talby Roach. I'd like to answer that. Because of the modified format, I wanted to get as brief as possible, and I have limited access to staff as I've sent them either home or they're in their offices right now awaiting a phone call. In addition, normally on several of these papers, I would have reviewed what my recommendation is associated with them, and to be quite honest with you, I have not had time to do so in the past several days, nor would any of my staff here have time to look at it. So I selectively looked at these saw them as not time critical, and therefore we'll bring them up at a later meeting.
Thank you.
Okay, any other questions or concerns? It sounded like it's been moved and seconded, so I think we need a vote on amending our agenda to exclude item 15, 17, 19, 20, and 23. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
In this format, Myra, do we need a roll call, or do we want to roll with a lot of people saying aye?
No, as long as there are no objections.
Okay, any objections? Then we proceed to item 3, that's the public comment. Given the new format of today, Myra, were there any speaker cards that you'd received for today's meeting that you want to read? Or that you can read?
Yes, Commissioner Holman, we received 3 comment cards for today. After the meeting, after the conclusion of today's meeting, all of these comment cards will be scanned and forwarded to the board. The first one was received previously from Mr. Tom Sullivan. It states, at the last board meeting, there was a discussion of making changes in the procedure for signing up to speak and the time allotted. I think the only change that should be made is to allow speakers to sign in at the meeting, as 24 hours notice is too much. I don't know of any government entity that has such a requirement. As to the 5 minutes allowed to speak, I hope that stays the same. Mr. Roach mentioned how the St. Louis County Council has a 3-minute limit. What he didn't mention is the problems it can cause. What happens is that people want to finish their remarks or statements even though their time is up. That leads to a conflict with the chair who is conducting the meetings. There has been a couple of times in the last few months where police officers have had to nudge speakers away from the lectern. I don't think you want that at your meetings. The Metropolitan St. Louis Sewer District has 5 minutes for public comment, as do most city councils. University City is the most liberal, 5 minutes for each agenda item. So a citizen could speak for 15 minutes at a meeting if they had comments on 3 agenda items. Despite the policy, meetings move along pretty good. What I would suggest is that you consider having board meetings on Saturday mornings. That would allow more public input and presumably be more convenient for commissioners and citizens. Thank you for considering my suggestions. The second comment card we received was from Mr. Mitch Eagles. He states, I am writing to urge you to suspend fare enforcement on Metro, both as an economic device to relax the strain on workers who rely on our transit system, but also to reduce our fare enforcement officers as a vector for the disease, since they interact rather closely with each person in the train during their rounds. The parking enforcement in the city has been suspended, and I think it is only reasonable that transit fares and enforcement should follow suit. Fare revenue will be significantly down regardless of our state of emergency, and the FTA has stated they are allowing flexibility. I am asking you to show leadership here and ensure our system will not prove yet another strain on working people who rely on Metro during this crisis. I am sure you have moved all possible operations at Bi-State to remote work and are taking utmost precautions for our transit workers as well. It seems unlikely there will be an in-person April BSD meeting, so I suppose I'll see you when I see you. Thank you and Metro for continuing to operate through this crisis. P.S. If the system should need to suspend service, is there a certain amount of notice transit riders should expect? I understand that there may not be a clear answer, but I was curious. Mitch Eagles. The third and final comment card we received was from an employee, Erdna Williams. This comment card pertains to labor and personnel issues. Therefore, under board policy, those items are typically not addressed in open meetings. Therefore, I have been advised to scan this card and make sure that you receive a copy of it following the board meeting today. That concludes the public comment section.
Thank you. I believe we can move to item 4, the minutes from the January 24th, 2020 combined Ops and Audit Finance Administration Committee meeting. Those meetings have been provided for review by the committee, and we need a motion to approve them.
I will make that motion, that's Justin.
Thank you, Commissioner Zimmerman. Is there a go ahead? Windmiller, second.
Brown, second.
Myra, I'll let you decide who seconded. And all in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any nay? Moving to item 5, we've got the fiscal year 2020 external audit for client service plan from Reuben Brown. Tammy Fulbright, will you give comments?
Yes, I will. Thank you. Good morning. This first item just relates to the external audit. Can you hear me now? The first item relates to the external audit. We have a 5-year contract with Reuben Brown. This will be our 2nd year with them. They will be in auditing our FY20 financial statements, looking at our federal funds receipts, and also our NTT reporting. They start interim field work in April, final field work in August, and they expect to have draft reports in October, and that's my report.
Do any of the commissioners have any questions with the Reuben Brown report?
This is Wynn Miller. I wanted to quickly ask whether or not, because of the coronavirus, whether or not this is going to be delayed.
I expect that it will be.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Thank you. That is for approval, so we need a motion to approve the audit.
So moved, Commissioner Dolly.
Thank you, Commissioner Gully. Do we have a second?
Second.
That was Commissioner Brown, and then you. And all in favor, please say aye.
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 Any opposed or abstained? Thank you, Ms. Fulbright. That motion carries. Item 6, the operating and capital budget for 2021 and 2023. I believe Colby Roach and Tammy Fulbright might be giving comments. And you might be planning to address this, but I would assume that this was completed in haste prior to our new normal, so perhaps any comments that you give might acknowledge what changes we might also need to anticipate.
Yes, good morning, Commissioners. This is Colby Roach, and I want to add that Jessica is here as well, and Mary Lammy, who will handle some of their specific areas, especially since there will be some side commentary associated with, obviously, this was an FY21 budget that was prepared not in mind with, obviously, the significant changes that we're seeing in our society due to COVID. But I will provide some additional comments, both in my CEO report, both in open session and in executive session, about potential service impacts, and, for instance, with a couple of major financial planning opportunities to try to anticipate where we will likely go in FY21. However, it is critical that, of course, we go through this budget process. I apologize for the clunkiness of it. Obviously, this is a much more effective document when we go over it in person, but we'll try to do our best, and I hope we've been thorough in answering questions, yet not wasting everyone's time. So moving along, I'm going to start right off the bat with going to slide 2, which of course has some of the essential Metro Transit facts. And of course, with a system of our size and our impact, it's kind of amazing how we are embedded into the fabric of this community, and of course, with that being embedded in the effects of where we are today, we are literally working every day at trying to adjust service in this new dynamic. But that, of course, includes where we started in 2020, and of course, where we're moving kind of in a path for trying to increase service and come to financial accountability. So moving very quickly, of course, I would go to slide 4 now. Safety and security, of course, is our highest priority, and I think we've been successful at changing the entire dynamic of our relationship associated with Metro Security Strategy, which now is a document signed by all 3 of our jurisdictions. We also will be moving to a new security contract with G4S, which starts April the 1st. And of course, then moving to better hardscape measures, including access control. And as you all saw, we have completely new leadership in safety and security. I cannot help but note that the addition of Stephen Berry as the general manager of safety his experience in dealing with and running, for instance, the Emergency Operations Center, his experience out of Florida in dealing with emergency situations like this has been simply invaluable. If I could take you over to the EOC and tell you how that is operating, I would, but of course we are enacting all the protocols to try to be able that we're still running service and respecting the measures that are required of us. So although I think in some ways we were lucky to do that, as an organization what we're trying to do is be responsive, be informed by our board, and set a new path. In this case, by setting that new path, we are getting the beneficiary of new talent, which is helping us get through these very difficult times. The other aspect, obviously, is moving towards financial responsibility and stability over where we're going in trends. As you helped me with our budget in FY20, we were able to take nearly $20 million out of that budgeted number and chart a new course. Now that we are looking at the FY2021, the budget in front of you contemplates a year-over-year increase of roughly 1.66%. Now I'm on slide 5, just to know. I must commend the staff at reacting to these directives. They are hard, they involve hard decisions. There are many hours behind them, but I'm very proud of their effort to find some new space and chart this new direction. In addition, we are developing long-term financial strategies that fit into these initiatives. And one is, of course, noted in a successful refunding of the 2009 bonds, which created nearly $50 million in savings over time, but created, most importantly, nearly $20 million of capital to be used in safety and security hardscape. Moving to slide 6 is, of course, my favorite slide of the entire presentation. And that's really because this shows where our trend is. So the green line on the bottom is where we are, okay? The red line showing a 3% growth model and the blue line being a 2% growth model. Trying to target somewhere around 2% would be what makes sense, assuming where we are typically seeing our sales tax revenue year over year increase in Missouri. So therefore, it's a good kind of benchmarking. 3%, quite frankly, is too high. We are not in a growth mode, and that would be a problem. So I would note, based on a 2-year annual average, we actually achieved a 0.85% increase. That's combining both fiscal years. I'm very proud of this. I want to commend staff on their hard work in getting there. So just to talk briefly in slide 7 of what our upcoming goals are, and I shared with you a more extensive list, but for the purposes of this, I wanted to talk about what our main goals are right off the bat. Of course, improved perception of safety on Metro Transit and the image of bi-state development. So in the end, what this is about is people and getting more revenue and getting more folks on our system and having them be confident in our system. That confidence includes even with the effect of the COVID-19. I was really bolstered in that we actually achieved 2 consecutive months of ridership growth just recently. It was a sign that we are making progress. Of course, unfortunately, the events are going to blunt that. But I still, as a staff, hold on to that, showing that after nearly 42 months of ridership going down, we are starting to turn. Now, obviously, there's going to be changes, but let's use that as a positive part of the message, and I'm using that with staff. Then, number 2 is, of course, moving to operational efficiencies, eliminating redundant and outdated processes and procedures. A really key element of that, of course, are the efforts that we've made through Metro Reimagined. This is looking at our system in a new and innovative way. I want to extend my congratulations to staff, and any time that there is a system redesign, which we've gone through in St. Louis County, we expect that it takes a while for our riders to react to that. We have been bolstered that those reductions in new service design have been actually quite reasonable. So that would mean that our system could, under Metro Reimagined principles, be more efficient, so that we're seeing more use in our highest use corridors, which ultimately could use to more efficient and better ridership. Moving on to slide 8, I want to note, for instance, one of the guiding principles is, since on the Missouri side we are sales tax based, so that gives us an idea of where the regional growth is right now. And you'll note that it's oscillating even from negative growth to almost 3%. So if you were to average it, really closer to a 2% growth rate, of course. So that informs what our target would be in trend analysis on the earlier slide. So now, in the interest of hearing some other voices, I'm going to hand over to Tammy, who will take over at slide 9. Tammy?
Thank you. So I'm going to stick to the column for budget 21, and we'll talk about the line items within revenue and some of the changes there. So the first one listed is passenger revenue, and you'll see it's about $38.4 million, and that's up about $250,000, which is a little less than 1%. So we're remaining conservative on our growth there. The next line item, grant sales tax and contractual revenue, is at $278 million. This is up $9.5 million, and there's more details related to that, which I find are very helpful on the executive summary in the book on page 7 if you want to look at that, and I'll go through a few of those right now also. So what that mainly makes up is our funding partners and their contributions and help to us. St. Louis City, they have about a 1.2% increase, or $425,000. St. Louis County, we're asking for $2.7 million, which is about 1.7%. And St. Clair County this year has added about $4.5 million in additional bus route service that they will be adding in 21. And total add there is about $5.3 million, or 9.2%. So that is the bulk of what is changing on that line item this year. On interest income, I did have a chance to change that a little bit because we do know the rates have went down with the market recently. So we are only expecting to, actually it'll probably be less than this, but right now at $12 million, a little less than 1% growth there. And then other revenue is made up of advertising, vending, concessions, maintenance, paratransit, and that line item is at $6.8 million. We have decline there because of paratransit contracts, which is mainly related to Medicaid and reductions in contract there. If we skip down to expense, you'll see the total expense here is $309.8 million. And I'm going to come back to that because that's a little different than what you saw on Talby's slides before. So Mr. Roach, we'll go back and look at that here shortly. For wages and benefits, we're seeing that it's at $210 million, and that consists of, and the increase there is about $5.7 million, and that consists of some increases for workman's comp, the St. Clair Transit increases, and the ATU contract that happened earlier this year. When we get to the next line on services, that line item has an increase of $4.4 million, and that's mainly related to non-capital projects, some mobility alternatives of about $1.5 million, and other increases related to contracts for safety and security of about $650,000. Also there we see consulting services increases of about $1 million. Fuel and lubrication stayed about the same. Any increases we see there, the $500,000 is closely related to St. Clair County and increases there. Parts and supplies, we actually saw a decrease of $2 million, and that's mainly related to tires and tubes and revenue equipment parts. Skipping down to casualty insurance, we see an increase of $2.4 million there, and we're just seeing increases in our lines of insurance there. So that's a big one for us this year, and we're working into looking into that for future future years and upcoming, just looking into. Utilities have remained pretty constant, and then other expenses, when we get down to there, those items include things such as training, property taxes, leases, travel, and they were pretty consistent, up a little bit, about 2.9%. Skipping down after operating expenses, you'll see interest expense was at $25.6 million. This makes up our interest expense on our bonds and also our capital leases. Other non-operating expense is related to our shelter workshop. We contribute 2% of the half cent 1973-74 tax there. So for the total of net income before depreciation, we are at close to $2 million. And as I said, on the next slide, we are going to see a comparison. And what I did here is I broke out the operating expense. So if you look, you'll see that the total operating expense on slide 9 was $309.8 million. And on the next slide, you will see that we started out with that $309.8 million, and we are making some reductions there. And the reason I'm doing this is because we need to compare apples to apples from budget 2020 to 21. And some things that have increased that we need to take into consideration there is some of our non-capitalized projects. So I reduced the $1.1 million there. That was an add this year. And then the additional service and contract with St. Clair County Transit District. And the main reason for this is that we have revenue that offsets at the top section that covers the operating expense here. So that gets us back to the $303.4 million, which is roughly a $5 million increase or 1.66%.
And from here, we're going to move to Jessica, as I'd like her to kind of move on as we now get to really the operating concepts. Jessica, please.
Thank you. This is Jessica Miller. Good morning, Commissioners. So for our FY21 budget, as you're aware, we passed a new labor contract with Amalgamated Transit Union in January of 2020. We continue to negotiate a labor contract with IBEW. However, the expense increase for FY21 is primarily in wages and benefits. Much of that is benefits, but it's also the wage increases associated with that contract. Moving into slide 11. Benefits are and wages do comprise the lion's share of our operating budget. Transit is, of course, a very labor-intensive business. The other large item is services. Services also is primarily labor. This includes services for things like our contract security team members, our police contracts, our cleaning contracts, and other transit supporting services. Parks and supplies, there has been some increases, as Fulbright mentioned, and utilities is inclusive of Metrolink traction power, by the way. When we compare ourselves, slide 13 now, FY20 against FY21, the largest increase in terms of comp and benefits does come from benefits. We have held the line in compensation in part by reducing our workforce and in part by holding wage increases to a level that is sustainable within our existing revenue streams. And while our benefits costs do continue to rise, I must commend our benefits team for delivering from calendar year 2019 to calendar year 2020 a flat budget for our employee benefits. Moving on to slide 14, you'll see this comparison. Our parts and supplies, we've experienced just a little bit of decrease, and again, services is primarily contracts for labor. Slide 15 reflects our revenue streams. Again, in Missouri, as Mr. Roach mentioned, we are primarily funded by sales tax proceeds from St. Louis County. That comprises 46% of our operating budget. The city of St. Louis is contributing $37 million, or 11% of the operating budget, and St. Clair County is supporting 18.7% of that budget. St. Clair County revenue streams include both sales taxes as well as downstate operating assistance from the state of Illinois. Our passenger revenue to date is 11.5% of our operating budget. We call that our fare box recovery ratio. I do want to note that that fare box recovery has declined as our ridership has declined. Our federal, state, and local revenue for operating assistance, primarily supporting our capital maintenance programs, particularly our vehicle maintenance programs, comprises 7% of our operating budget, and the capital lease and investment income is primarily related to our facilities. Our other revenue streams do include things such as advertising revenue and contract revenue. I want to jump now to slides 17 through 19 and give you an overview of how Metro Transit's operating expenses compare against their peers. And it's important that we benchmark ourselves. While these aren't perfect benchmarks, there are differences in things like cost of living, certainly between St. Louis and some of our operating peers like San Diego. However, it's worth noting that Metro Transit's operating expenses, which we typically measure per revenue mile, are quite low compared to our peers. We're very proud of our record at maintaining low operating expenses. We do that through our labor contracts ensuring wage growth while keeping that wage growth in line with our revenue streams. We also do that through efficiencies in our programs like vehicle maintenance and the way we structure our service design and limiting our operator requirements. So that's bus operating cost. Every revenue mile is $8.79. This is 2018 data. I want to note that's available from the National Transit Database. This is the most recently available data. Light rail operating costs per revenue mile are $12.92, well below our peer group average of $21.70. Our paratransit or call ride cost per revenue mile are just a bit below average at $5.01 per revenue mile. Our peer group average is $5.48. Paratransit in St. Louis and nationwide has by far the highest cost per passenger because of its demand responsive nature, the relatively low capacity per vehicle, and the level of service that we're providing to our very important call ride customers. Taking a look at passenger boardings and our history from FY12 through our FY21 budget, as we have talked about long in this forum, commissioners, we have experienced significant erosion in our ridership. As Mr. Roach mentioned, we were bolstered this calendar year by ridership growth in the months of January and February. Our FY21 budget projected 21 to be the year at which we would stabilize our ridership and begin to grow. Of course, our ridership projections and our budget projections are going to change now in response to the COVID-19 crisis. We're going to continue to monitor ridership and service levels and make adjustments accordingly. That concludes our presentation of the operating budget. And I want to turn it back over to Mr. Roach and Ms. Fulbright.
Thank you.
Very good, thank you, Jessica. And we will give more extensive comment in my comments along with Jessica on where our current ridership is in response to COVID during my comment section, CEO comments. So moving on, we're going to go very quickly through the capital projects portion of the presentation. I will move through these slides quite quickly. Of course, if there are any questions offline or detail that is needed, this budget will obviously also be brought subsequently to the full board meeting upcoming. And of course, we have all that period of time to be more specific about questions from any board member, whether that be today or whether that be an email. We are happy to answer them. So moving on to slide 22. Tammy, I'd ask you just to comment a little bit on the federal sources of capital funds, and then and on to slide 23, and moving 24. Then when we get to expenses by category, Jessica, if you could grab it there.
Thank you. I'm actually going to skip over to 23 first because it shows the full picture of our capital projects. We are at about $814 million. That is made up of federal funding and local funding, and a little over 75% comes from federal funding, and a little under 25 comes from local funding. So I'm going to skip back to 22, and that's going to give you the breakdown of the federal funding sources, so the $625.2 million. If you look at that pie chart, you'll see that the majority of the money comes from formula funds. And the next largest source is the state of good repair funds, and then discretionary funds. So the first two are funds from the FTA that are formula funds, and discretionary is more competitive funds. Then I'm going to skip on to 24, which gives you local sources of funds, and that makes up the other $189.5 million. The large.
Tammy, I apologize. I am going to just interrupt for one quick comment. And as you notice on that slide, on slide 22, just because it is relevant, you note the formula 5307. Those are the capital funds under emergency order that we would be able to transfer over to operating, okay? So there was an FTA emergency order that does allow us to transfer those for operating on an emergency basis. Those would be the ones that we would tap, and I just wanted to make that relevant comment as we move through. Please continue, Tammy.
Okay. The local sources, as I mentioned, are $189.5 million. One of the largest sources there is our sales tax, so those are the matches that we have on the federal funding portion. And then next being other local partners that may help with discretionary grants that we get. So there's about $52.1 million shown there in other funds. And then lastly, funds that come directly from our operating budget. Also matches we get from Illinois and St. Clair County.
So moving into expenses by category, within our capital program, the lion's share of our expenses are for vehicles and supporting equipment. This is things like the replacement primarily of our Metro buses and our Metro Caller-Ride vans. This is also support vehicles that we use to support our day-to-day revenue service, including light-duty and specialized heavy-duty equipment. We're also including peripheral equipment in this category. This is things like lifts and jacks and tools and equipment that we're using at our operating facilities to support our revenue and non-revenue rolling stock. Another very important category is our current and future rail projects. That $172.2 million, or 21% of our operating budget, includes maintenance and rehabilitation for our light rail alignment and stations, preventative maintenance to our track systems, our overhead catenary systems, and our signal systems, and a significant sum of money for the replacement or rehabilitation of our light rail vehicles. We are at a stage, we've talked about this a little bit, where we're nearing the end of a feasibility study that will wrap up this spring and help advise us on next steps for upgrading or replacing our light rail vehicles. Each year, we are setting aside capital funding explicitly for that purpose. New information technology improvements at a total of $23.7 million primarily includes hardware and data and software systems. We have $47.8 million in health, safety, and security projects. These projects primarily include upgrades to our security systems, such as our camera systems, our communication systems, our operation systems, such as SCADA, which is our supervisory control and data acquisition that controls our rail systems. We also have several projects included that would improve the design and layout of our MetroLink light rail stations. And finally, we have new development and environmental enhancement of $123.4 million. This includes station upgrade projects. We have talked about those 5 stations that we've just concluded a design study on, including our Del Mar Loop, Forest Park, 8th and Pine Convention Center stations. And we have included each year funds devoted to investing in these stations. We're also, for many of the projects that I've mentioned today, we are actively pursuing competitive federal funds that would help offset our reliance on our formula funds and our local sales tax proceeds. This is going to become especially important as we consider the possibility of shifting those 5307 formula funds away from these capital programs, or some amount of that, towards supporting our ongoing operation in support of the COVID crisis. One other area that I want to mention is preventative maintenance. That's a total of $60 million. We are permitted by the Federal Transit Administration to use a portion of our federal formula funds in support of the preventative maintenance programs for revenue vehicles that were purchased with federal funds. I just want to give an overview of some of our major projects, and this is slide 26. Our revenue rolling stock replacement in this 3-year cycle, that contribution is $111.9 million. So that's primarily vehicles. Nearly at each committee meeting right now, we have been presenting you with a contract or consideration for awarding revenue vehicle replacements. Today we're going to talk about one of our electric vehicle replacement programs. So we continue to repopulate that fleet each quarter. Our light rail vehicle upgrade replacements, $214 million. Our Union Station tunnel project, which there isn't funds that's coming out of our new sources in 21 through 23, but this is an active and a very important capital project. We anticipate spending approximately $57 million between FY21 and 23 on that Union Station project. There's a lot of active discussion going on about this project, and I want to tell you, Commissioners, that in the last couple of weeks, we've been working to shift and escalate some of our construction projects with our contractors in response to closures of some of the businesses and available track time. So we are making good with the situation that we're given right now within our community. And that Metrolink infrastructure improvements, as the track, the system, and the station improvements, $172 million. Our facility infrastructure improvements, this is our operating facilities that require infrastructure improvements. We have 7 major and several minor operating facilities, and of course, we're maintaining them in a state of good repair. And then finally, our safety and security initiatives at $47.8 million. This year, we approached our capital program development a little bit differently. We engaged our team for program development and grants and finance to work very closely with all of our individual level project managers to create a capital program that is based in both state of good repair and transit asset management, is responsive to emerging trends and things that we must act upon, including improving safety and security of the system, while also incorporating projects that are intended to enhance economic development, to make the system more attractive and comfortable, such as those Metrolink station upgrades. This has been a strong process, and we have engaged a much wider band of team members in the ownership and development of the capital program. I look forward to continuing that process into the future. This concludes my presentation of our capital budget.
Thank you. Commissioners, do we have any questions? I have this is Commissioner Windmiller. I actually have a couple of questions, but I don't know if we're doing the entire document or just Jessica's presentation.
We've just paused at slide 30, roughly, just to be sure that we're in a transit-specific questions, Commissioner. So we'll just pause for a minute, and then we will move into tourism and freightway and the other business units.
Okay. Well, I do have a couple of questions. I think it makes sense to get questions out now for this section in particular, and in each section moving forward if people have them.
Very good. I see my staff nodding their heads, so we'll be sure to put a pause in there. So why don't I just be quiet now and listen for questions. Thank you.
So this is Commissioner Windmiller. The first question I have, I guess, is for Jessica. Jessica, I appreciate the comparison between cities that are of comparable population size to us and the cost per mile. But I'm curious about whether or not you have ridership numbers for those cities as well, so we can determine whether their ridership is considerably higher, lower, or in the same range as us?
Commissioner, we do have those figures from National Transit Database, and we would be happy to provide them. So the selection of peer cities is based less on regional population than it is system size. So our peers include systems with a mix of modes, like what we have, bus, light rail, paratransit. Some also offer other modes like commuter or streetcar. And then the size of each of those respective systems is what dictates peer size. So, for example, in population, we are certainly smaller than the San Diego MSA, but we've got some operating similarities. We are much larger than the Buffalo, New York MSA, but we have some similarities. We would be happy to provide those ridership figures. There are a range of peer comparison operating statistics at NTD, National Transit Database, that we monitor on a regular basis, and today we shared just a small sample of that with you.
If I may just interject, I know that at least 2 times within my 8-year tenure as a commissioner here, I've heard some kind of level setting information about our peer markets and how we consider ourselves against others. And if I would suggest that perhaps the team do a walkthrough of the whole board so that people had a little perspective on how we as an organization are comparing ourselves to other organizations. And I would argue that perhaps the general public doesn't always share that same comparison point. And so perhaps you might want to add to the considerations that some of the, not necessarily peer from our perspective, but peer from the public perspective. Kind of a wild card. I'll let you do with that what you may, but I just wanted to interject that there.
Thank you. So, Commissioners, I will ask staff to prepare such a comparison based on NTD and other industry available data sets for the KPIs or key performance indicators that we monitor most, and we will share that with you.
Thank you. This is Commissioner Windmiller again. I was really just trying to figure out whether or not ridership on those comparison cities, where we fit within that structure as well.
Sure.
So if I really appreciate what Commissioner Holman said, which is I don't think the public always knows with whom we are compared and how that comparison flushes out. So that would be helpful to me. The other question I had is really related to, I'm sorry that I have some sticky notes on my, bear with me a minute, sticky notes on the statement of activity, and there was one rather significant increase, and I think it was in I'm going to see my time back because I need to find that, but there was a pretty significant increase in one of our operating expenses, and I wanted to go. It wasn't in the casualty insurance. It was in the insurance area. I'm sorry, casualty insurance. What is the? I mean, that's a really significant increase.
We're just seeing rising prices in that and what we've actually paid out. And so we looked at our actuary reports and where we're at, and we actually upped the amount that we actually put in the budget because we're actually paying out more. So it is something that we are looking into, and we will continue to look into even in 2020 to really try to address that.
Thank you. The last question I had really had to do with the ability for the organization, and maybe this, Tully, you'll address this in your comments, and if so, then I'll hold until then. But I'd like to know more about the federal government and FTA allowing us to dip into capital funding for potential budget shortfalls based on the COVID-19.
Yes, I will address that, and just to follow on the casualty and liability issue, that was one issue actually in our current budget, that in our payouts we were not making the number. Quite frankly, to be honest with you, they wanted to project a higher number than this one, but we pushed back, we tried to push back a little bit, as just have had bad timing with claim activity and so on. But let me detail that discussion out a little bit more specifically, because it is a very specialized area. But just as far as the numbers are concerned, is absolutely correct. That sort of a rise is something that we should always make a note of in greater detail. I will commit to that.
Thank you. Any other questions, or shall we proceed? Sounds like we're proceeding. Thank you.
Very good, Commissioners. So we're going to move on. Essentially, we are at slide 30. At this point, your presenters will be largely Mary Lammy and balanced by Tammy Fulbright. Mary, just to encourage you to stay brief, as I got a lot. So please do your best to move through. And if I could ask you also, once you move through a specific division, just pause for questions. Thank you.
All right, very good. Good morning, Commissioners. Starting off with the Gateway Arch Statement of Activity, you can see our revenue for 2021 has increased. That is attributed to a 3% increase in ticket sales. And for our expenses, there is an increase as well. That's attributed to increases in part-time staff and seasonal staff, an increase in their salaries to better compete with the local market. We also experienced an increase in cost for tram mechanics. That was a request from National Park Service. And then also an increase in marketing and another request from National Park Service. Those efforts to better market the Gateway Arch, the museum, and to improve communication, to improve that experience to get to parking and to the facility itself. For slide 32, you can see our revenue. Obviously, our largest revenue is the adult ticket sales and our child ticket sales. And as all of you know, we have been very successful with increasing our revenue thanks to the value-added model that we're using to better market those tickets. If we go to slide 34 for capital projects, you can see for fiscal year 2021, we are moving forward with a navigation signage, and then engineering for the Tucker Theater reconstruction in fiscal year 2022. You can see the dollars we've included to repurpose the Tucker Theater. Those funds will be funded with the beneficial fund. Any comments regarding the Gateway Arch? Okay, very good. We're going to move forward with the riverfront attractions. For our revenue, that revenue decreased for our budget for 2021, and part of that is this is our effort to be more conservative because of the different business interruptions, whether there's a government shutdown or the flooding, and then obviously with the COVID impact. Our expenses, those have increased, and again, part of that is in line because we have increased the frontline employees' wages and benefits. And then on page slide 37, you can see that obviously the greatest generator of our revenue focuses on cruise sales and food sales. Any comments regarding the riverfront attractions? Okay, we're going to move forward with the St. Louis Downtown Airport. For the 2021 budget for our revenue decreased. Part of that is, in fact, when we looked at the fuel flowage fees, when we estimated the 2020 budget, we had assumed an increase. We did not experience an increase. Those fuel flowage fees have basically stayed consistent at 1.7 million gallons, so we showed that in our revenue statement. And then for revenue, we also incurred a decrease in utilities. Several of our tenants, we are having them participate in a direct payment for utilities. For our expenses, they actually decreased slightly. Some of the increases we did incur with expenses is attributed to part of the utilities. We installed a new airport lighting system where we are going to have the lights on more frequently, and so we are anticipating an increase in that. And then if we go to slide 40. 42, you can see the breakdown for our revenue, and obviously that the largest generators of our revenue is based on leasage and hangar rentals. And then on slide 44 for our capital projects, you can see we've got funds in there for resurfacing of one of our taxiways. And then we are also starting some of the engineering for projects that are going to be surrounding the airport itself. And then I think the most significant thing is if you look in fiscal year 2023, we still are planning in advance for the engine run-up that would be funded with federal funds. Any questions regarding the airport? Moving forward to the St. Louis Regional Freightway, for our revenue, you can see a slight increase. That revenue is a combination of funds from East-West Gateway, and then also based on our discussions with Madison County and Madison County Transit and our expenses, you can see a decrease in those fundings. Any comments regarding the statement of activity for the Freightway?
So we're going to move on to executive services at this point, and that will be handled by Tammy Fulbright. Tammy, I believe you're on slide 49.
Yes, that is correct. Executive services includes the executive office, our legal assistance we have here, real estate and economic development, tourism innovation, and internal audit. And what you'll see on the 2021 budget is that our revenue has increased by about $373,000 or 7.7%, and that's largely due to Metro Transit. They paid 70% of those management fees. And if you go down to expenses, you'll see that total expenses were $4.4 million. And what we're seeing here is that we have some increase in expenses related to safety audits that are required by the FTA, and so our internal audit team has to make some provisions for that to get ready for that, and so the bulk of the increase that you're seeing in the expense line item there of $500,000 is related to that, and that leaves us with net income of about $828,000. Are there any questions? Sorry, I was on the wrong slide. That information was on page 4 or slide 49. If there are any questions. Okay. The next area is internal service funds, and the start of that is on slide 53. And we'll start out with our health insurance fund. And what you'll see there is that for revenue and for expense, our claims are going, well, we were expecting them to be down in the upcoming year. I'm sure that's going to change. But as of this report, we were expecting a decrease of $1.4 million. If you go on to casualty, you'll see that our claims paid expected growth there was about $500,000. So that was a 8.3% increase. And then skipping forward to slide 55. Sorry, I'm not keeping up. You'll see there that we expect claims paid to increase by close to $1.9 million in that area. Storage, do you want to keep going?
Moving to the nonprofits, as you know, as an organization, we are essentially putting these nonprofits, although they are being held, they have very limited activity at this point, as they're not the focus of our policy, and we basically have them parked. Unless there are specific questions about them, I'm going to call this the conclusion of our report so that we can be sure to answer questions. Please, if there's additional details that we can provide, that would be more appropriate via email, that we can respond to all commissioners, we are happy to do so. I want to thank everybody for their time, especially with how clumsy and clunky maybe this presentation was, but I very much appreciate your patience, and I'm open to questions at this point.
Well, as chair, I can say it was a great
presentation, and I thank everybody for all the hard work that doesn't even show up on the slide.
I've got a couple comments. Can I be recognized, please, Justin?
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's over the phone, so I didn't want to talk over anybody, but two quick comments. One, I know we have a large budget and $100,000 may not be that significant, but with respect to the money we are getting from MCT, I would strongly encourage Mary to set up a time to go over there and present at one of their, who knows when it'll be, but an upcoming 2020 meeting. I think, and I can attend or Derek can attend if we think that would help, but I think they have an expectation that, we will at some point kind of keep them up to date on the activities of the regional freightway and kind of how we're spending their money. So I would just, I don't want to spend a lot of time on it, but I would make that suggestion. And then I think Toby said he would do that, but with respect to increasing costs and insurance and claims and our overall, kind of budget with that, I know several of my colleagues in the past asked questions about this in addition to our legal budget. So, that's not the priority right now, but I think there's an ongoing interest in maybe digging a little deeper into those numbers and trying to figure out what we can do. So I don't want to spend a lot of time on it right now, given the bigger picture issues we're dealing with, but I'm still interested in, possibly exploring those. So anyway, those are my two comments. Thank you.
Any other questions or comments? Okay, well, this is an item that is for committee approval to be moved to the full board. Is that correct?
Yes.
So then we'll need a motion with somebody interjecting. Okay, go on mute if you can, and if there's no other questions for now, then we need a motion to move this to the full board for approval.
This is Commissioner Gully. I move to move the fiscal year 2021 operating and capital budgets to the full board for approval.
Is there a second?
Commissioner Brown, second.
Thank you. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? Thank you. We move on to item 7, the intergovernmental agreement between Bi-State Development and Madison County Mass Transit District.
Good morning, Commissioners.
Jessica, thank you.
Good morning, Commissioners. This is Jessica Medford-Miller. We have before you this morning a request for approval and advancement to the Board of Commissioners for consideration, an intergovernmental agreement between Bi-State Development and Madison County Transit. This is an update to a long-standing contract between BSD and Madison County Transit. Our partner and managing director from MCT, S.J. Morrison, would be here today to co-present under different circumstances. This contract calls for revenue sharing and mutual revenue acceptance for some revenue or for some passes between Metro Transit and Madison County Transit. It also authorizes shared use of Metro parking lots and facilities for MCT vehicles. They do bring in buses from Madison County to our Emerson Park Metrolink station, a couple of other stations, and into downtown St. Louis. And that's critically important for creating a truly regional mass transit system. This contract, a new item, is for MCT to pass through $100,000 of passenger revenue to Bi-State Development for the purpose of sustaining the regional freightway, which is what Commissioner Zimmerman just mentioned. This contract was developed in partnership with Mary Lamey of the Freightway, our Chief Financial Officer, and our partners in Madison County Transit. It has been approved by the Board of Madison County Transit, and we present it to you for consideration. And that draft MOU, or intergovernmental agreement rather, is included as open session item attachment 7. Are there any questions on this item?
If there are no questions, then we do need a motion to approve that we move this to the full board.
This is Commissioner Cox. A motion to approve.
Is there a second?
Commissioner Donovan.
All right. Thank you. All in favor, please say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? Moving forward, item 8, contract award for paratransit certification and administrative services. Jessica?
This is Jessica Medford Miller. We have before you this morning a request to advance to the board next month a contract for services associated with our Americans with Disabilities Act services team. Currently, Metro has an ADA services team that is led by ADA coordinator Amy Parker. They perform a number of critical functions here at Bi-State Development, including serving as a policy source for information related to ADA specific to providing customer service. We also provide direct services to our customers, including assessments for paratransit service. Each customer is assessed individually in concert with a medical professional to determine their eligibility for reduced fare and or paratransit services. And we also provide a really unique and I think special program called travel training, by which we provide one-on-one training to customers who qualify for paratransit services, but who wish to avail themselves of the freedom and benefits of our fixed route system. We have recently undergone some changes in our ADA services team. We are working to meet the evolving needs of the organization. We're also preparing to move out of their existing space at the Transit Access Center near Forest Park to Bolivar Metrolink Station as we anxiously await a transit-oriented development that will soon be constructed on this site. As such, we have released a request for proposals for services, including the provision of travel training, assessments, and issuance of reduced fares. We have begun to co-locate those customer-facing services near our 8th and Pine, our Metro store at 8th and Pine, and then some of the advisory or administrative services here in the headquarters building. Some of those services are required on an on-call or part-time basis, like travel training. We think we can be more efficient and more effective in serving our customers if we were to subcontract for those services. We're currently in a procurement process. It is our anticipation that by our April 23rd board meeting, we would have an updated briefing paper that includes cost and a recommendation for a firm for your consideration. Today, we ask that you advance this item to the Board of Commissioners in April. Are there any questions on this item?
If there are no questions or discussion needed, we do need a motion to approve at this full board.
Simmons.
Commissioner Dolly.
Second, Miller. Did you get that, Myra?
Yes, Commissioner.
Thank you. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed or abstentions? The motion carries. Thank you. Then item 8, contract award for paratransit services. Wait, no. Item 9 is that.
If I can interrupt just for a moment, I'm trying to be respectful of time, yet still to move through these issues quickly. So I'm going to ask Jessica and Tammy to be as brief as possible on items 9 through 13, unless I hear an objection from any commissioner.
Thank you. Let's proceed.
Okay, so item 9, this is Jessica Medford Miller. We have before you a request that the Board of Commissioners approve updates to our Title VI program. Title VI of the Civil Rights Act ensures that we are not using federal funding in a discriminatory fashion. The updates include our draft major service change policy, draft disparate impact policy, draft disproportionate burden policy, and assessing impact policy. We have conducted a public comment period for this. These draft policies are on our website. In addition to in-person input, the public has been invited to review the draft policies and comments online. We are requesting that this committee advance this item to approval to the Board of Commissioners. Any question on our Title VI program?
Commissioner Dolly, I move for approval to the full board, to move it to the full board.
Second, Zimmerman.
All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed or abstentions? Thank you. Item 10.
Item 10, this is Jessica Medford Miller, is a request to advance to the Board of Commissioners a sole source contract renewal with Remix software. Remix is a sketch planning software that we use extensively with a planning system development and Metrobus operations for service development. It reduces staff time and enables us to move through things like Title VI equity analysis in the service planning process. We have used this for nearly 3 years now, and we are requesting that the Board of Commissioners approve a contract not to exceed $288,000 for Remix software as a service for the next 3 years moving through FY22. I would note that this software has been invaluable as we developed Metro Reimagine and as we continue to move through the Transit Vision 2020 process with St. Clair County. Any questions regarding Remix?
I don't have a question, but I do have a comment, and it's just really a genuine reiteration of comments from before, that, you know, I look forward to the time when we are more in the leading edge of technology development and resources for our community. And if there's anything about what this software allows us to do that is of better service to our constituents, I would love it if that you could just take a second to illustrate that now.
So this is a powerful software tool, and in my nearly 20 years of working in the field of information science, this saves such a tremendous amount of time and allows us to visualize characteristics directly comparing a one route alignment, for example, against another route alignment. We can see how many low income or zero or low automobile households we're serving, how many minority or non-minority households we're serving. We can also see important destinations in real time and compare these options without conducting detailed analyses on each of the options. So this is a critical tool for harnessing all of the myriad data sources, including our own stop level ridership, in real time as we make decisions.
This is Commissioner Simmons. I have a question on that.
Yes, sir.
Jessica, is this the program that has caused some problems with the current issue over here in St. Clair County?
So Commissioner, Remix is a sketch planning tool, so it is designed to help develop illustrative routes, so configuration, service level, and things like that, that helps us understand, in particular, the ridership and socio-demographic impacts of that service. What it is not, though, is an operations planning and scheduling tool. For that, we use Trapeze FX. Trapeze is our planning and scheduling software. So we import content directly from Remix into Trapeze. So decisions like running time, layover, schedule frequency, etc., are made in Trapeze. And with respect to Transit Vision 2020, some of those initial costs came out of Remix. So think of Remix as a whiteboard for service planning. Think of Trapeze as the real operations scheduling machine. And that's where we're getting our real operating plan and thus our real costs. Does that make sense?
No, it doesn't. My question is this program as what's causing the issue that Director Sharkey is having with the overcost of what was quoted as? Does this program have anything to do with that at all?
So if I could address that, Commissioner Simmons, to be perfectly honest, these completely redesigning service is clunky and difficult. And as it was in Metro Reimagine, as difference of the Missouri side, we didn't have as close a client working with us through this very difficult process. I will say that I think that some of the initial runs that we went through in this clunky process, we could have done a better job of working closer with St. Clair County Transit District, and I take responsibility for that. However, I think since some of those initial problems, staff, and particularly the planning staff and Jessica Gershman have done a laudable job of picking that up and doing a better job. And we were able to surround some of those costs. It is absolutely true that, for instance, in Remix, when you do a program like Remix, and I'm not a specialist in this, you're doing it based on essentially how you're planning the routes through the population. Then when you move to Trapeze then gets to more run picks and applies essentially the data associated with our labor contracts. That can be very, very complex and a clunky operation. I would fully admit that we could have done a better job in communicating through Transit Vision 2020 with the district. But in recognizing that, I think we've really tried to press very hard in it. I think as the last email I saw from Mr. Sharkey, he actually thanked the planning group for picking some issues up. I wish I had the date of that email right now, but it was just a few days ago prior to our hard COVID-19 push. But we're trying to redouble our efforts to be sure that that partnership is stronger and that we are exchanging more accurate information. I hope that explains it.
Yeah, I saw that email, and I still see that there is an overreach that he's asked them to go back and try to sharpen their pencil. So my concern is for the amount of this proposal, and then to hear that it is a concluded situation, I have a problem with that. But go ahead. I got my answers.
Okay, any other questions about the Remix software? I believe we need a motion to approve this to move to the full board.
So moved, Commissioner Gully.
Is there a second? Commissioner Brown. Commissioner Brown seconded, thank you. All in favor, please say aye. Aye.
Aye. Aye.
Any opposed?
Simmons opposed.
Thank you. Any abstentions? Beach opposes? Okay, we've got 2 opposes. I believe the motion continues to carry to the full board based on quorums. Correct me if I'm wrong.
That's correct.
Thank you. Then we move on to the next item, please.
Good morning, Commissioners. This is Jessica Medford-Miller. We have before you this morning for consideration and approval a request for a contract modification to New Flyer. This is an item that came to the board in late fall 2019 for the purchase of 14 battery electric articulated buses. As we are moving through the final specification with New Flyer, the cost per bus increased modestly, and as a result, that was $10,000 per bus, bringing the total cost of each bus to $1.34 million for a total of $18.76 million for the purchase of 14 battery electric buses. We are here before you to approve that additional $140,000 or $10,000 per bus for the contract award for New Flyer. Are there any questions on this item?
If there are no questions, we do need a motion to approve. This is Windmiller, so moved. Is there a second?
Second, Commissioner Gully.
Thank you. All in favor, please say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstention?
I'm sorry.
Thank you. The next item, please. Oh, did somebody?
Commissioners, I apologize. I inadvertently skipped item number 11, which is sole source contract award for public address and customer information systems upgrade. We have before you this morning a request for advancement to the Board of Commissioners, a contract not to exceed $4.549 million to be awarded to Collins Aerospace for advanced communications systems associated with our PA, customer information systems aboard MetroLink. This is for the visible and audible announcements at MetroLink platforms. We would be adding new signage, new LED signage, including train arrival times. They would be 3-line signs that would be placed at the center of platforms, at platform entrances, and at some stations at surface level where elevators are located, informing customers of in red time arrival time, in blue line arrival time, and in amber, other passenger alerts, as well as replacing all of the speaker systems at the platform level associated with MetroLink. We did conduct a feasibility some time ago with HNTV for the design of this project, and it was through that process that we selected Collins Aerospace. They were previously under a different name, AirInc, the manufacturers of our original system, which was last updated in 2007. Are there any questions regarding the PACIS upgrade?
If there are no questions, we do need a motion to approve to the full board.
Commissioner Brown moves to board.
Thank you, Commissioner Brown. Is there a second?
Cox, second.
And all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? Then we can move to item 13. Contract award for temporary health services.
It's okay, so, I apologize, I'm grabbing this. 13, this is just for temporary help services. White paper enclosed, and I'm gonna try to move very quickly. Are there any questions associated with that? Thank you, can we move on to approval?
I believe we can, if everyone's comfortable moving forward to approval without a presentation. Is there a motion?
I'll make the motion, Commissioner Gallagher.
Thank you. Is there a second? Thank you, Commissioner Brown. All in favor, please say aye. 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 Any opposed? Any abstentions? Moving forward to item 14, the revision to board policies.
Barbara Enneking, please.
Good morning, Commissioners. This is Barb Enneking. The matter before you this morning is a revision to board policy section 10.060 dealing with board and committee meetings. There's already been quite a lot of discussion at the board regarding making these revisions and changes. The highlights of these changes would include allowing speaker cards to be provided up to the start of the meeting, and also to reduce the time for speaker presentations from 5 minutes to 3 minutes in light of the fact that we anticipate we will have more public speakers appearing at the meetings. The only other thing is to ask that this matter be not tabled in accordance with board policy, so that when it is approved at the April board meeting, that it become effective immediately thereafter. Any questions?
Thank you. I think we had a pretty robust dialogue about this before. If there are no other questions, we do need a motion to approve this change.
I will make that motion.
Thank you. Is there a second? And then, thank you. All in favor, please say aye. 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 Any opposed or abstentions? The motion carries. We can jump to item 16, I believe.
Mary Lemmy, please.
requesting referral to the board a letter of agreement between Bi-State Development and the Jerry Costello Group for consulting services for the St. Louis Regional Freightway and Bi-State Development. This is a non-competitive procurement or a sole source contract. Funding would be split 50% between the Freightway and Executive Services. The consultant provides strategic advice and planning services for the Freightway and Bi-State Development, working closely with both myself and Talby Roach. Over the last 4 years, they have been instrumental in setting up meetings with USDOT, the Class 1 railroads, and elected leaders, resulting in funding for our highest priority projects like Interstate 270 and the Merchants Bridge. And actually, most recently, Merchants Bridge received a grant in February of 2019. Currently, the Jerry Costello Group is providing assistance with the St. Louis Downtown Airport Gulfstream lease agreement negotiations. General Dynamics, the airport's largest tenant and responsible for over 70% of all airport revenue. That includes both Jet Aviation and Gulfstream. Gulfstream currently has 400 employees. Securing a long-term lease agreement that supports Gulfstream operations and workforce and that provides financial stability for the airport is extremely important to the airport, and the Jerry Costello Group is playing a critical role with these efforts. Are there any questions?
Yeah, I think I guess maybe not specific to this, but overall, I know we've kind of not been spending quite as much money on outside lobbying, and just big picture, you know, where are we going with our spending on lobbying, and how are we determining, you know, which lobbyists we're using and which we're not? And then second, I totally believe everything that was just said, and I don't expect to have, you know, detailed breakdown of services provided like we would with a you know, outside counsel bill or maybe an accounting firm bill. But it might be helpful sometimes, at least with me, if we had some type of summary or report from some of these consultants, just keeping us abreast of what they're doing and kind of what, you know, what we're getting for our money. And anyway, those are just my two thoughts. If anyone wants to comment now, they can. If not, I just wanted to put my position on that.
Thank you, Commissioner. This is Talby Roach, and just two quick answers. So number one is, yes, in 2020, I eliminated a large percentage of our consulting group, and I do have those costs tracked, and would be happy to share that and move forward to everyone, especially the ones that are accounted within the executive services. But in that vein, I wanted to be sure that you all were aware of any of those, and I intend to bring any renewals of contracts in front of you, so just in the interest of full disclosure, which includes this one. Specifically though, on this one, I did ask the Costello Group to renegotiate that contract and lower their monthly rate, which they did do, associated with trying to be better and more efficient. And in addition to this, obviously with the concentration on the Gulfstream lease and that critical corporate negotiation, we did assign some of the Costello Group's costs over to that cost center. But I'd be happy to detail that out more appropriately, and we'll be happy to follow up. Thank you.
So item
Mr.
18.
Windmiller, I'm sorry, I really have a qualifying clarifying question. So is the contract, which is for $9,000 a month and up to $1,000 a month in expenses, not to exceed, is it specifically for the freightway and for lobbying or issues related to the freightway, or does it include Metro and Bi-State?
So I specifically made the decision to split those costs, so not apply all of them to the freightway, appropriately so on a 50-50 basis, and move 50% over to executive services to account for the consulting on the downtown airport right now. And should those negotiations go well, we can move some of that cost over to the airport right now, but right now the economics of the airport, quite frankly, would have a hard time dealing with that. So I've split it relative to where I see the workload in consultation with Mark Vago, the CFO, and that's how we've handled it to date.
Thank you. Then I would suggest that since half of the contract is being, is applied to the downtown airport, that we don't see significant support for the downtown airport, which will cover the cost of that consulting contract, that we reconsider that on a fairly regular basis.
By that, would an annual basis be adequate, Commissioner?
That's adequate for me. I don't know whether or not we're approving lobbying or legislative contracts on an annual basis, but in this case, I think that's warranted.
So noted. I'll be happy to commit to that, and quite frankly, I feel more comfortable with it, so I'm happy to do so.
Thank you. Any other questions? If not, we do need a motion to move this to the full board for approval.
Simmons makes the motion based on Windmiller's suggestion.
Thank you. Is there a second? Windmiller, second. All in favor? Please say aye. 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 Any opposed? Any
No,
abstentions?
Justin.
That's an opposed.
Yes.
Thank you. Any abstentions?
Commissioner Beach abstains.
It sounds like the motion still carries with one opposed and one abstention. We can move to item 18, the discussion regarding the potential refunding of Series 2013 bonds for the.
So this item is to address the market as it is rapidly changing. We have approximately $150 million in callable bonds on 10/1/22 on our Series 2013 bonds. And last week, the market presented itself that there was a possibility of savings of approximately $35 million in present value savings. And so we looked at that and we put this briefing paper together. Since then, as the market changes, that muni market has had some difficulty, but we'd like the opportunity to continue to move forward, just to be available and ready if the opportunity does present itself, that it makes sense that we move forward on a refunding. And what we would need to do, or what we would need to ask, is that the committee allows staff to prepare a resolution for the board authorization and approval of a refinancing if conditions permit and return.
As an example, Commissioners, this is, for instance, one of those situations, depending on market movement, that this money would be used exclusively to make up for problems associated with the impacts of COVID-19. And so this is, I ask for your discretion. We would, of course, bring this at least to the executive committee, but it gives us an opportunity to see if we can do something very quickly on the market movement to account for our downturn in revenue. Thank you.
Any questions? We need a motion to approve.
Simmons, so moved.
Commissioner Dolly, second.
It's moved and seconded. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Or abstentions? Thank you. I believe we've jumped to item 21.
Financial statements on page 9, and I'm going to just quickly run through. So basically, if you look at the consolidated financials, including self-insurance funds, the income before depreciation December 31st is 3.9 million. Assets are 1.4 billion. And I think I'm just gonna focus on the arch a little bit and talk about their income before depreciation was at 2 million at that point in time. 1.1 more than budget, primarily due to the success of the variable ticket pricing. And then also on transit, you'll notice that they are at 1.9 million before depreciation. And what we're seeing here is that some of the budget savings is due to vacancies, decreased spending on materials and supplies, some favorable claim experience, and the savings from the bond refunding. And that's my report if there are any questions.
I know there's a lot of work that goes into this report, so thank you for summarizing it. I believe that was for information only. Are there any other questions about that report? If not, you can probably, Tammy, move into your next item.
Okay. So for December 31st, the treasurer's report on page 3, you will see, I'm just gonna stick to the December numbers, that we were at 193 million for by-state directed funds. And our trustee amount was at 55 million at that point in time. I will tell you that we're pretty close to those same balances currently. The trustee directed funds hold most of our bond debt service reserve funds and our debt service funds. And so the way the bond deals are set up now in the trustee agreements, we actually put our debt service payments up ahead of time. So those balances stay pretty much the same until we get to the next period, which will be April, which we'll see some movement there. And that's my report for this morning, if there's any questions.
There are no questions. I believe we can also jump to the operations report.
If we will, Commissioner, Jessica and I have discussed combining essentially her operations report with my President and CEO's report, where we will try to give you a better synopsis of the effects of CV-19. I wanted to note in that I have authorized $130,000 for expenses associated with doing temperature forehead checks of our operators as they come into work as an additional screening item. Just wanted to bring it to your attention. We are trying to put every effort to bear in trying to protect not only our employees but our citizens. So we are hopeful this will be in place on Monday. That would involve that every one of our employees would be screened on a temperature basis with infrared. That is one of the many things that is coming out of the Emergency Operations Committee, and we're trying to be as responsive as possible. Jessica, could you please give the details associated with service impacts with what we're seeing right now?
Certainly. And Commissioners, I know we've got a couple of items to discuss in executive session this morning regarding COVID-19 response, and we can provide the board with a written update or summary of all of our COVID-19 related efforts. Now, with respect to transit service, in the first half of the week, we declined in ridership about 25% on bus, 30% on Metrolink. In the past 2 days, that has increased to a 30% decline in ridership aboard Metrolink. Metrobus. We are pulling Metrolink data now, but I do anticipate a loss in Metrolink ridership to be in excess of 40% for the last 2 days. Our paratransit demand has decreased about 25%, and we anticipate, should there be any triggering events such as the closure of sheltered workshops, then we would see paratransit demand significantly decline. I believe we're going to discuss service strategies, Mr. Roach, in executive session.
Yes.
Okay, so other items that you should be aware of is that across by-state development, we have been working for weeks to support our employees. There is a special page on our external website that provides training and information to employees. We released updated human resources and absence management policies to employees Sunday, the 15th, as well as yesterday, the 19th of March, another update to those policies. I anticipate releasing another update today, if not today, then tomorrow, concerning situation-specific responses to COVID-19. We are working to provide personal protective equipment to employees, namely frontline employees like operators. That includes nitrile gloves, sanitizing spray, and wipes that they can use on the operator cabin portion of their vehicles. We have not issued masks. We do not have an inventory of masks. However, in the event employees have access and wish to wear a mask, we are allowing them to do so. As Mr. Roach mentioned, we are working to stand up temperature screening at access points to all of our facilities for all by-state employees, and that includes limiting our access in every case but one to just 1 point, 2 points at our DeBoliver facility. We have increased our cleaning efforts, and we've been doing this for weeks now for all of our facilities and all of our vehicles, and we are using chemicals that have been approved by CDC and EPA for COVID-19 response. We have an active communication program going out to employees using email, our messaging boards at our facilities, supervisory contacts, and when we're providing updates to critical policies like human resource and incident procedures, we're also printing those policies and delivering them at the supervisory level at all of our facilities. We're committed to reducing the likelihood of spread of the coronavirus, and there are a number of policy and service considerations that we're going to need to address in the coming days as we prepare for the escalation of the COVID-19 crisis. We're also working on an economic sustainability strategy. Mr. Roach mentioned earlier that the Federal Transit Administration has authorized the use of 5307 funds to support up to 80% of COVID-19 related expenses. Those funds would come from our existing capital resources. We are also tracking our expenses, including personnel, equipment, supplies, etc., preparing for potential reimbursement by FEMA under the Stafford Act as we do operate in states that have been declared in states of emergency. We are working, and Mary Laney is doing a great job on point with this, we're working with our federal congressional delegation and the American Public Transportation Association to lobby for federal funding specific to public transit. APTA has submitted a request to Congress for $12.9 billion for transit systems across the country to support the direct costs of COVID-19 response, fare box revenue loss, dedicated sales tax revenue loss, and restart expenses. We are compiling right now estimates of those expenses, and we'll be submitting them to our congressional delegation and requesting their support later this evening. Any questions on COVID-19 high-level response?
I have a question. As always, Jessica, you have given us kind of a thorough and thoughtful overview of what's going on from your perspective. And I think that in your perspective, you also do what you can to represent the general public perspective. And once again, I feel the need to ask the question kind of from that opposite point of view. That's all of the things that you guys are working on. Where are the vulnerabilities that we should be worried about? What are the things that the general public is worried about right now that you can help assuage fears, or that you can kind of reiterate things that we can all do to protect those that are most vulnerable in our citizens and also within our staff?
So within our staff, and these are similar concerns faced by the general public, our perhaps greatest threat, Commissioner, is that we are, of course, an organization of people serving people. Customer-to-customer contact and customer-to-employee contact and employee-to-employee contact is our greatest threat. We are working on strategies, and I would like to present some specific considerations for you in executive session that would limit that contact. We must provide critical services so that our region can continue to operate. That critical level of service is necessary to support our healthcare workers, individuals who are engaged in the supply chain associated with things like food and medication, but there are some different ways that we can do that. We're going to need some flexibility in our operation to allow us to provide a critical level of service that has enough capacity to allow social distancing on board our vehicles and enough space between our operators who themselves come into contact with high numbers of the public, close contact for operators on bus and Colorado in particular, each and every day. We need to do this to protect both our customers and our employees, and of course, just to sustain our operation as we continue moving forward through this crisis. So we're gonna need to make some adjustments to service level. We might need to make adjustments to fare policy. We are going to be having to set up, I think, a decision-making process and make some choices today based on where we think we're going to be a week from now. We have a certain amount of capacity to make changes on the fly, if you will, but I would like to bring us to the next level of response to sustainability. Some of these actions require days to implement. So we have passed the point at which we can act in any given day based on the situation on that day. We are fortunate to be in close contact with our peers across the country who are in the further stages of the COVID crisis than we are. We are still in the initialization phase here in the St. Louis region. There are other agencies that are actively operating in the escalation phase where they're actually having community contagion. So this week we've talked with our peers in cities like San Francisco in particular, and we've gotten a good understanding of their playbook, and I'd like to move us toward that direction.
Thank you. Any other questions? I believe this item was for information, so if there are no other questions, maybe we can move forward. Lord Talby?
If we could move forward and get into executive session, I would appreciate it.
We do need a motion to go into executive session.
Simmons, so moved.
And the second, please.
Brown, second.
And I believe we need a roll call to go into session.
Commissioner Simmons,
Yes.
Commissioner Brown,
I've got an electric clock.
okay, the recording is back up now.
For recent changes to board policy, no final actions were taken in closed session, and for items requiring final action, roll call votes have taken in open session. Therefore, do I have a motion to approve the minutes from January 24th executive session?
Simmons, so moved.
And a roll call vote is needed.
Commissioner Holman,
Yes.
Commissioner Gully,
Yes.
Commissioner Beach,
Yes.
Commissioner Cox,
Yes.
Commissioner Brown,
Yes.
Commissioner Galladay,
Yes.
Commissioner Windmiller,
Aye.
Commissioner Simmons.
Yes.
Motion passed.
Thank you. That motion carries. And is there any way we can put the next three together into one?
Yes, that would be fine.
Thank you. So then, do any commissioners have a problem with that, though?
I make a motion to convene all three of them.
Brown, thank you. Thank you. All in favor? Oh, nope. Roll call vote.
Commissioner Simmons,
Yes.
Commissioner Brown,
Yes.
Commissioner Beach,
Yes.
Commissioner Holman,
Yes.
Commissioner Galladay,
Yes.
Commissioner Windmiller,
Aye.
Commissioner Gully,
Yes.
Commissioner Cox.
Yes.
Motion passed.
Thank you. It looks like the final thing is, if there's no further business, a motion is needed to adjourn to the regular meeting. So moved.
Brown, second. This is Commissioner Gully.
If I can be first in the roll call vote, I will say aye, and then I have to disconnect.
Actually, we can do just
Goodbye.
a voice vote on this.
Thank you all. Take care. Godspeed.
Bye-bye.
Aye.
Aye.
Bill, everybody.
Bye.
Aye.